My name is Dr. James M. Ebeling. I'm an aquacultural engineer, which means that I look at the production of fish in indoor or extensive production systems. Kind of got into aquaculture in a very strange way. I have a very odd life in the sense that tend to move around a lot. So the past, however long it's been, 40, 50 years, I've lived at 12 different locations. I moved every 5 or 6 years. And when I was in University of California, Davis, I met a gentleman named Raul Piedrahita who taught a class in aquaculture. And I thought, well, that's kind of cool. I wonder what aquaculture is all about. And so I took his class and I really, really enjoyed it. And then after that, went off to Hawaii and did aquaculture in ponds, which is a nice place to work. But the important thing is I took advantage of just a quirk, just a whim, to take a class that I knew nothing about, that was outside of my area of interest. Actually, at the time was pyrolysis of biomass materials. I was actually doing gasification, pyrolysis of agricultural waste. And so just by quirk of fate or a desire to expand my experiences, I took this class and that led me into aquaculture. So I've been doing aquaculture, which is actually agriculture in the sense that we raise the livestock being fish. But the fish that we raise is at extremely high densities because we do it indoors. There's a lot of problems with outdoor aquaculture in terms of the impact on the environment, in terms of the impact on things like mangrove in Thailand, et cetera. And so we moved indoors. And when you move indoors, you have to increase your production levels. And that's where the real challenge comes. That's what's always fascinating about agriculture, is there are always new frontiers, new levels, new things to investigate, new plants and new crops. So in this case, we were growing fish. Now, I imagine you probably at home have a 10-gallon aquarium with your 2 guppies and a dead goldfish. What I was doing, I was raising in that 10 gallons of water about 12 pounds of fish. So take your 2 cats, shove them into that aquarium, and that's about the density I was raising fish at. So you can imagine that there's quite a challenge in maintaining the water quality and keeping both the fish alive and in a sense happy so that they eat and grow at a rapid and optimal rate. And that's what I ended up doing. I worked with a lot of different people at a lot of different universities. Over the years, I actually wrote a book, which is kind of thick, but it basically talks about aquacultural engineering and a lot of very intimate detail. And from that book, I developed a reputation and have been asked to speak and lecture pretty much all over the world at conferences and workshops, describing to people and explaining to people and helping them to design appropriate technology for whatever that may be. And so I actually worked with somebody from Gaza, and we, with FAO cooperation, put together a manual that is used to teach people there how to grow fish on their rooftops. Now, as I was saying, aquaculture and agriculture is always interesting because there's so many different things that crop up. And so at first I was growing fish. That was fun. But then fish didn't really make a big profit. And then someone came along and took the fish waste and they used that waste, which for us was a waste, and they tried to figure out what they could do with it. And someone said, well, there's lots of nitrogen in it. Why don't we grow crops? Because people have irrigated with it. So that's where aquaponics started. And aquaponics is the raising of fish plus plants in a closed system and a very synergetic system. The waste from the fish, high in nitrates and phosphates and other mysterious things, really make plants grow well. And so aquaponics started, and it's actually done a pretty good job over the last few years in terms of growing and diversifying. Once aquaponics started, of course, then the different levels of production started. Do you do industrial grade aquaponics with greenhouses that are measured in hectares or acres, or you do small scale aquaponics in communities designed to provide relief to quote food deserts where there are not enough leafy greens or fresh vegetables. And so I've done both. I've built large scale systems. If you go down to Tucson, when you're down that area, check out Merchant Gardens. It's about a 10,000 square foot greenhouse. It has a large grow bed where they raise lettuce and basil and all kinds of other things for the school system. In addition, there's a small aquaculture operation that raises fish whose nutrients are then used to raise the crop. Kind of cool. Right now, I'm working with a company in Spartanburg, Mississippi, South Carolina, who want to build a facility. Basically, they were told they had zero discharge, and we said, okay, fine, we think we can do it because we'll reutilize all that waste material from the aquaculture operation in the plant production facility. So that's another example of kind of cool things that came along. Things that I wasn't looking towards doing. I didn't have a career plan, so to speak, 5-year plan, or going to be in 20 years, that kind of stuff. But rather just kind of flowed with where the interest of the community and the industry was. And also I've done lots of different things. I've worked at research facilities. I actually worked for a commercial company for 6 years. I did a lot of grant writing in order to get money to afford the research I was doing. And then about 5 or 6 years ago, I retired, kind of officially retired for the second time. And I moved to Tucson, where I helped build the Merchant Garden. And then also because aquaponics is so rich of materials that you help introduce it to about 5 different school systems, where the schools were using it to teach biology and chemistry and plants and animal husbandry, all kinds, and management. We actually had an entrepreneur group that worked with us to sell the produce. So they had a chance to work with an actual system where they grew the leafy greens and herbs and all kinds of other things. At the same time, I also then finally decided that I was going to move on. And this is kind of critical. You have to keep your mind open to all kinds of new experiences. Agriculture has all kinds of things going on now, from the urban ag programs in inner cities to the large-scale production facilities. But I decided that maybe it was time to move on to a different career. So now I'm at the University of Huntsville, Alabama. I'm actually an undergraduate working on a degree in aerospace engineering. And part of that came around because I was always interested in growing plants and things off-world. And so the question was, well, how do you do that? Well, NASA had worked on it for years back in the 50s and 60s and 70s, and then it just stopped, mainly because nobody thought we were going to Mars. I mean, let's face it, there wasn't a lot of transportation available. Well, Elon Musk changed that a couple of years ago. He started talking about sending 1 million people to Mars, maybe 100,000 to start with. And so now the question became a very viable question, well, what do you feed them? So behind me, up top, you can see NASA's little poster, Mars needs farmers. And so as part of that program, I started working with the Controlled Environment Ag Center in Tucson and some other programs to develop maybe some production technology that was appropriate for off-world use. And what kind of plants do you grow off-world? What do you grow? I mean, the bottom line is you're not going to grow wheat and barley. There's just not enough room for stuff like that. And besides, wheat's easy enough to grind into flour and ship in bulk. And so I proposed to some individuals in NASA that what we should really be emphasizing is the spicy herb production. Because let's face it, it's all the herbs. And that's one of the problems, for example, we have on the International Space Station. Food's pretty bland. No matter what you do to it, it's still kind of bland. And so in order to get the astronauts to eat it, they tend to spice it up a lot. Really, I don't think you could eat the food that's served in the International Space Station on Earth just because it's so spicy. So I've been putting together a list of various crops, of actually growing some crops. You see down below the pictures, there's 2 grow-out systems I've built using off-the-shelf materials from Lowe's and some containers that I bought through Amazon.com. And I actually have it in my spare bedroom behind that wall. And I'm growing right now, let's see, in the top shelf, there's tomatoes and cucumbers and lettuce and something else. And on the shelf below that are all kinds of spices. So there's rosemary and thyme and those kind of things that I share with my neighbor. I would say as I share with my neighbors. So if I were to look at these questions you gave me, What advice would I give to students? The most important advice I would give would be open. Be willing to try things. If I were to hire somebody, and I have hired lots of interns over the years, the things I look for is whether they're willing to try something new. I mean, they may have gone to school and learned all kinds of math and physics and biology and plants, et cetera, et cetera. But are they willing to get into a fish tank and clean the walls? Are they willing to chase the fish down in that tank to harvest them? Those are the kind of things that you need to kind of think about and volunteer for, get involved with. If you want to do urban agriculture, which is really the hot topic nowadays, you need to get involved with urban agriculture programs, volunteer at the food bank, get involved with a local production facility. And if there isn't one, maybe start one. Work with a school, work with some even the food bank, for example, and talk about doing some kind of in-house production. One of the things that have been the most important in terms of advancing my career has really been the ability and the experiences I had growing up doing hands-on projects. Nowadays, students don't have a lot of opportunity to really build things. So when I grew up, I learned how to use a lathe and to weld and to carpentry. I've built homes. I've done all kinds of construction type projects. And that's what's needed in agriculture. You need a lot of broad-based skills when it comes to using your hands, knowing what kind of materials you can use, what's available, and how you can use those. And to be honest with you, I'm one of these guys that enjoy spending an afternoon just wandering around Lowe's, looking at all the cool things that are for sale that have become available in the last years. So in terms of what's rewarding about my career, really has been working with people, from as far away as South Africa to as close as the Aquaponics Verde School District in Tucson, and working with students and seeing sometimes the surprise when you force them to eat a piece of lettuce because they never knew where lettuce came from. Or better yet, working with students to take some basil, some other crops, and make some salsa sauce and having a little party afterwards, or making a salad from what you've basically grown in your own little garden. It always tastes better when you grew it yourself. And it's amazing that kids don't have that experience as much as they used to, or even know where things come from as they used to. So that's been probably one of the most rewarding things. Plus, just the opportunities and the diversity of knowledge and the skills that one has to have keeps you alive, keeps you young.